Hundreds of doctors stage a mass sit-in protest to demand a pay rise. Cameron denies turning a blind eye to China's human rights record in order to curry favor with Beijing. And Canada's new Prime Minister plans to stop its bombing missions against ISIS. Good evening. Hundreds of doctors staged a sit-in protest at Queen Elizabeth Hospital this afternoon to demand the same pay rise that civil servants are getting. The protest was attended by government and hospital authority representatives who hinted they may agree to the demand. Shah Da Silva reports.
Hundreds of public sector doctors in white robes sat on the floor of the main lobby at Queen Elizabeth Hospital. They showed signs with the word anger to express discontent that their salaries were not raised in line with those of civil servants. Although their pay is not pegged to that of civil servants, over the years they've been subjected to salary increases and cuts in line with government workers. But this time around that hasn't happened, and they are demanding an extra pay rise of 3% for senior public doctors, backdated to October last year.
No, 3% is not a large sum of money, but it is the respect and our dignity that we have to protect.
If the conflict doesn't resolve, I'm certainly that the service will be compromised. I think people will fed up and the sufferer will be the patient.
Although public doctors treat the vast majority of Hong Kong patients, the public health sector itself has long suffered from a manpower shortage condition, the symptoms of which could worsen if their concerns are not addressed. Government and hospital authority representatives at the protest sent positive signs, however, that they might give in to doctors' demands.
Taking into consideration various factors, for example, the need for services, the morale of healthcare workers, as well as the need to ensure that the remuneration package is attractive enough to retain and recruit adequate number of healthcare workers to ensure the quality of public hospital services. The hospital authority can indeed determine the salary level of its employee.
We have a clear indication that government has no objection. They're actually going to have able to fund the 3% indication today.
The chief executive of the hospital authority indicated a decision on the doctor's demand could be reached at a meeting of the hospital authority board tomorrow. Shah Da Silva, TVB News.
The family of the mainland tourist who died over a shopping dispute on Monday has arrived in Hong Kong. Meanwhile, police have laid a holding charge of manslaughter against 2 men in connection with the case. They'll appear in court tomorrow. As Owen Fung reports, police today took one of the suspects back to the jewelry store for a crime scene reconstruction.
Police took one of the arrested suspects back to the jewelry store in Hong Kong this morning. Hooded and handcuffed, the 44-year-old male suspect stayed in the shop for around 10 minutes before being taken to a car park nearby. The crime scene reconstruction lasted around 45 minutes. The suspect could be seen kicking a dummy multiple times. It was then placed on the side of the road. The fatal attack happened on Monday. According to reports, a dispute broke out between a mainland tour leader and 2 members of the tour group after the visitors refused to make any purchase at the jewelry store. A local tour guide and the leader of another mainland tour group joined in the argument, and they allegedly pushed the 2 visitors out of the shop before attacking them. The victim was said to be trying to mediate in the dispute when he was beaten unconscious. The man died in hospital yesterday, and the police have arrested 4 people in connection with the case. The death of the mainland tourist has prompted fierce criticism from a state-run newspaper. In its editorial, the Global Times says the incident reflects legal loopholes in Hong Kong's tourism sector. It stresses that the fatal attack further damages the city's reputation, which has already been hurt by the security chaos and radical anti-mainland behaviours over the past year. The editorial says many on the mainland will oppose the country's effort in maintaining the city's economic prosperity, and mainlanders will choose to visit other Asian destinations instead. This, the article claims, will create uncertainties in Hong Kong's competitiveness in the long run. Owen Fung, TVB News.
A 2-year-old girl has died in hospital after suffering head injuries. Her father has been arrested on suspicion of child abuse. According to the police, the 2-year-old girl's parents brought the child to Nethersole Hospital in Tai Po on Tuesday afternoon. The girl was already unconscious at the time. She was transferred to Princess Margaret Hospital, but died this morning. Police arrived at the hospital this afternoon and took away her father. Her mother is said to have fainted after learning about her child's death. She remains in hospital for observation. Sources say the girl fell off a chair in the family's apartment on Namxing Street in Tai Po. She then suffered breathing difficulties and was unconscious when she reached hospital. Doctors discovered she was bleeding in her brain, which they thought was suspicious, and reported it to the police. During the investigation, officers learned the girl had broken her arm before this incident happened. They are now waiting for the coroner's report to determine the cause of death. The case has now been classified as child abuse. Pomp and pageantry in Britain as President Xi Jinping put on a charm offensive during his landmark state visit. But as Tony Saban reports, the trip is not without controversy.
In a speech at the British Parliament, Xi Jinping said he was deeply impressed by the relationship between Beijing and London during his visit. The United Kingdom was the first Western power to recognize the founding of a new China in 1949, and the first European Union member to build a comprehensive strategic partnership with China. Offshore renminbi trading center after Hong Kong, Xi said. The president also quoted Shakespeare, "What's past is prologue," and urged the two countries to join hands and move forward towards peace and development. Later, at Buckingham Palace, Xi was the guest of honour at a banquet hosted by Queen Elizabeth II. She praised the late paramount leader Deng Xiaoping for opening up China.
It was also Mr. Deng's visionary concept of one country, two systems, which opened the way for the return of Hong Kong to Chinese sovereignty under the Sino-British Joint Declaration. Almost 30 years later, Mr. Deng's vision has borne remarkable fruit. Rapid economic growth and development has transformed the lives of people across China and lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty.
Xi, for his part, said Chinese and British culture have enriched each other and contributed to human progress. The Industrial Revolution rejuvenated the world's silk and ceramics industry, while China's tea made the lives of British people more refined. But behind the regal pomp and pageantry, tension remains. On the first full day of Xi's 5-day state visit yesterday, Tata Steel announced 1,200 job cuts in Britain, citing a shift in market conditions caused by a flood of cheap imports, particularly from China. There are security concerns about a deal for China to build a new nuclear power plant in southwestern England. And both countries have played down the absence of Prince Charles from the banquet. The President and the Prince did meet earlier in the day, and there were protests by Beijing's critics over its human rights record and other issues. Demonstrators accused the British government of pandering to China to secure investment. Tony Sabine, TVB News.
And in a press conference a short while ago, the Prime Minister of Britain rejected suggestions that his country is turning a blind eye to China's human rights situation in favor of stronger business ties.
So I totally reject the idea you either have a conversation about human rights and steel, or you have a strong relationship with China. I want both, and we're delivering both. And it's when you have that strong relationship and the strong partnership that we have that you're able to discuss all of these issues.
Next, a deadly shooting involving Chinese diplomats in the Philippine city of Cebu. Police there say 2 diplomats were